I V M.
The D word, death, a dark word, a word heavy with loss and grief. And when it comes to children, we add the additional burden of discomfort. As adults, we have this tendency to avoid talking about death with our children. But what we forget is that children have encountered death at various levels already. A dead insect in the kitchen, a dead bird or an animal on the street, the death of a favorite character, or even the bad guy in their stories. When they experience the loss of a loved one, what they need from us is not omission, but an open show of empathy and understanding. Welcome to yet another episode of Big Talk About Tiny Humans, our brand new science backed, research focused parenting podcast. In this episode, Meghna and I distill a handful of useful takeaways for parents and other significant adults to help children deal with the loss of a loved one. Almost every job in the world requires training, except parenting.
You need to learn parenting on the job, and that can be really hard.
Here on Big Talk About Tiny Humans, we want to help you navigate the world of parenting better and make your lives a little bit easier.
Hi, I'm Meghna.
And hi, I'm Devishobha.
Every week, we bring you the best research on parenting,
Top tips from experts,
and actionable strategies to confront the numerous challenges that all parents and educators face.
So let's get started, shall we? Meghna, I think that as a species, perhaps just leaving out a few instances, probably through history, I don't think we have ever encountered an unprecedented amount of talk and mention about the D word as we are doing today. And we as adults are finding it so shocking and hard to digest with all the news of death and suffering and ill health around us. I just wonder what the kids must be feeling. I mean, there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of channels for adults to express and process their grief, but what are our kids doing? How are they processing it, right? So one example would be, one of my colleagues, she just lost her grandmother. I mean, her child lost her grandmother. She lost her mother-in-law. And my friend is really wondering how she can help the child process the grief, because she can make out that the child is suffering, but she's just struggling to, penetrate and figure out how to help her process those feelings, how to sort those feelings out, straighten them out, and, help her through the grief, because she's really very afraid of bringing that up, when the child is seemingly okay. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, have you also encountered such a thing in your therapy practice? Do you think kids would need a different approach to help them handle grief? And how is it very different or similar to how adults can handle grief?
I think those are very important questions. And yes, I have encountered, especially in the wake of the second wave, Shobha,
Right.
lots and lots of families coming in with this question. How do we help our kids grieve? Do kids grieve? Do they
Right.
understand death? They are so young. So, well, the simple answer to that question is if you're old enough to love, you're old enough to grieve.
Right.
Very young children might not realize that death is permanent, and they may think that the dead loved one will come back if they do their chores or eat their vegetables, right? It's as innocent as that in their
Right.
mind. Then very young children experience grief and loss. Children of all ages grieve, but how you respond to their grief differs across different ages. Okay. And I'm amazed when these families come to me with exactly the kind of concerns that you brought up. I don't know how to address this with my child. I don't know how to talk to my child about it. I'm struck by a couple of these ideas that I don't know where we've, as parents, have picked up from. For example, one of the biggest ideas that I've come across of late in the last 2, 3 months is that parents thinking that we should shield our kids from the pain of loss.
Hmm.
But
Right.
not true. Our natural instinct would be to protect our kids from this pain because it's almost like it's probably one of the worst feelings in the world, right? Losing a loved one. But we actually, the fact is that we don't help kids feel better with loss. We're never trying to help them fix a feeling. Grief is not something that you work through. It's something that you sit in. And if you have someone sitting in grief with you, who allows your feelings, who helps you understand them, then the sitting in grief just starts to feel better over time. And instead of this overwhelming loss, there's just someone there with us. And that's how we get through that period, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so this is one something that really surprises me when
Yeah.
when parents are like,
You know
we
what?
need to shield our.
Yeah, last year I lost my father-in-law. Right, my kids are like 13 and 14. I mean, 14 and 15 now, but at that time they were 13 and 14, and I mean they were very attached to their grandfather, and it was a very sudden passing away. So it was a shock for all of us. But there was this kind of feeling that the kids have kind of recovered very fast, that or so we thought. But a few months later, my younger daughter comes to me and says, you know what, Mani Tata, like her grandfather, right? He used to say that I am his favorite granddaughter. So I was like, oh my God, she still kind of, keeps thinking about him, remembers, right? But we don't bring that topic up, right? Because we are like, okay, now let's not bring up something that's not stirring them up, right? Now we don't want to stir any emotions. So we
But you
saw,
see, that's
yeah,
exactly what I'm talking about. This is
exactly,
actually a misconception that,
exactly.
that's exactly what parents think, that we should, if we
Absolutely.
talk
Yeah.
about
I can so
the
relate
person
to
who's
this.
not
Yeah.
there, yeah, we'll stir things up. But no,
Yeah.
it's needed. Children need these conversations. These, of course, these are tough conversations, but children
Mm.
need these conversations to process.
Yeah.
See, and as you said, right, a lot of parents think that when kids face the news of death, it will traumatize them.
Yeah.
But trauma is not an event. Trauma is not the death of their grandfather.
Right.
Trauma is how an event is processed in the family. If
Right.
a child is alone, with
Mm.
their overwhelming feelings, if those feelings are ignored or shamed or pushed away or never brought up, that becomes traumatic, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
dealing with the death of a loved one in your family doesn't have to be traumatic. In fact, this can be the source of your child's coping and resilience,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes.
When
Yeah.
we teach kids that the biggest and the most painful events in our life can be connected to and sat in together with someone and helped to be understood, then that becomes the source of their strength and resilience.
Yeah. Absolutely.
On this note, let's take a break and come back.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Advertising is Dead, Varun speaks with Anish Basteen, co-founder of Swami Drinks. They discuss the company's genesis and what it's like building a non-traditional premium product like tonic in the Indian market. This week on Cock and Bull, Cyrus Antriksha and I talk about Spotify's issues with Neil Young and other artists in wake of the controversy with Joe Rogan. On The Wire Talks, Siddharth talks to journalist and author Amitav Kumar about his novel on fake news, A Time Outside This Time. The Pulyabazi hosts discuss what the government spends on the most in their series Ek Sawal Kahin Jawab. And on Smarter with Sid, Siddharth introduces us to the Pomodoro time management technique. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Also, please do tell a friend. It really does help us when you spread the word about our podcast. And I'd also like to ask you if you could rate or recommend wherever you listen to our podcast. And speaking of where you listen to this show, if you're on an Android phone, do check out our new Android app. We have a brand new app with a brand new listening experience. Definitely check it out. I think you will enjoy it. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Bank of Baroda and CoinSwitch Kuber. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome back.
So I would like to ask you some questions about some of the reactions that children show. I feel that a lot of younger kids still have very unexpected reactions. Sometimes we see that this has actually happened. I think I lost my grandfather when I was maybe 13, but my younger cousin, he was only 4 years old. And when my grandfather passed away, it was like I have a distinct memory of him asking for a biscuit or something. Right. So it is like, and it was like, and that too when we were talking to him about our grandfather, and he immediately gave a very unexpected reaction. He didn't even respond to the question. He kind of segued into a whole different tangential thing, and he asked for something else. So I think it was a very unexpected reaction. So it could seem like they don't care, but I do know for a fact, because he was very close to me as we were growing up, I do know for a fact that he did feel a lot of that loss, right? So how do we handle this? How can parents understand and process this kind of a reaction from children?
Yeah, I think again, that's a very important question because, yes, especially younger children, although even older children can, but this more commonly happens in the case of younger kids who come up with what we label as an unexpected reaction, right? You're telling your preschooler that, honey, your grandma died or your grandfather died, and your looks up at you and says, "Can I have a snack?"
Right.
And you're like, huh? Did they even understand anything?
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
actually, they did,
Yeah.
right? They're telling you that they're overwhelmed, not that they didn't understand.
Yeah.
And to that type of reaction, I would say something like, "Yeah, Shwiri, we'll get to that snack. I think what you're trying to tell me is that you're really thinking about what I just said, and right now you'd rather do something else. And that's
Yeah.
okay. And we'll
Yeah.
talk about it more another time." And
Absolutely.
then move on. And then the next day, bring it up again. You can say, Shwiri, I'm thinking about what we spoke about yesterday. If you have any questions, if you have any big feelings, I'm here. I want to keep talking about it when you're ready. And then use your child's response as a guide. See,
Right.
the idea is never leave a child wondering. Never
Hmm.
leave a child with what's happening. I have no clue. So information never scares a child. Age appropriate information will never scare a child. That's what
Yeah.
we're concerned about, right? That we'll traumatize them. Let's not bring it up. Let's not even talk about it. Let's not even utter the D word, right? But that's not true.
Right.
The information doesn't scare a child. What scares them is wondering, being left alone, being
Yeah.
confused,
Having to
all of
figure it out
having to
all
figure
on
it
its
out
own.
themselves.
Yeah.
All of these things terrify a child.
Yes.
When a child
Absolutely.
asks a question, that means they're ready for a developmentally appropriate answer.
Right.
Yeah. And if
And
you're not sure sorry, go ahead.
no, I was also wondering, when you said wondering, I was thinking about what happens when the child thinks about the parent's death. When an extended family member dies, for example, a grandfather or a grandmother dies, naturally the child is wondering, if his or her parents will meet the same fate. And then sometimes they ask, are you also going to die? Sometimes they don't. So how do we answer? How do we handle that kind of a question?
That's like the hardest question for any parent to answer, right?
Right.
And here's what I would do to give an honest and developmentally appropriate answer. I would say something like, well, Shwiri, you're asking me a really important question. And I have every reason to believe that I will be alive. I'm going to be alive, and I'm pure for a very, 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 very long time.
Hmm.
And you're asking me if I can die. And I want to be honest with you. Yes, I can die. One day I will die. And I have very big feelings just thinking about it. I do. And then just wait and then pause, right? And then again, be guided by your child's response. So you're giving an honest answer and you're giving a developmentally appropriate answer. But you have to remember, don't try to, as a parent, don't try to rush in to reassure your child. Oh, no, no, don't worry. Everything is fine. I'm going to be fine. You don't know, right? You know, but you don't know. But it's okay to have these tough conversations, even with
Right.
your young child. These are tough conversations. Tough conversations are not meant to be ended with a ribbon on top,
Right. Absolutely.
right? We sit in grief. The idea is not to work through grief. The idea is we don't get to some beautiful point in tough conversations. We have them, we sit in them with our child, and our children learn that tough things come up. And my
Right.
mom or my dad is right there with me in the toughness. And that I have them who love me, who I trust. They're always there with me. And that tough feeling is surrounded by my mom or dad's warmth and honesty and directness. And that's what helps our kids build resilience.
Great. Thank you so much, Meghna. Those were so beautiful. The way you explained everything. You shared a lot of information about how we can expect younger and older children to respond and how we can process their response. That's great. Now, would you also please share some strategies that we as parents can use to help children process these big and difficult feelings?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I sort of said a few of them already, but I'm going to just put that in a context more clearly because I think it's important. So I
Right.
think the first thing that I mentioned was being really honest with our kids, right? So
Right. Yeah.
I mentioned how age appropriate information will never scare a child, right? So and this is what I'll say, when parents come to me and say, no, but what do we say? And so you can say something as direct and as honest and as developmentally appropriate as this. You know, Shwiri, I want to talk to you about something. You're probably going to have big feelings about this. Okay. Your grandma died yesterday. And then, if your child is young, you can say died means when the body stops working and someone's no longer here.
Yeah.
And then you can pause and then watch your child's reaction. You have to wait and allow for the feelings. Okay. Never, when discussing death with the kids, never use euphemisms like, okay, that your grandma she went to sleep. This can be very scary. This can actually, I had a child in therapy whose parents kept telling him that, she went to sleep, she went to sleep. And actually, he started becoming afraid of bedtime.
Oh my God. Okay.
Imagine. And don't say things like, she passed away or he passed away where? Just state it directly. Don't be afraid to use the D word. Okay. Another thing, and this is something that comes up a lot in questions. Should I involve my child in the funerals rituals? There was one parent who asked, should I allow my child, and that child was a teenager, should I allow my teen to even see the dead body of the grandmother she was very attached with who passed away? Right. So we have to understand the funerals exist for a reason, right? These rituals exist for a reason. They provide closure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
For kids, seeing how they would like to be involved in the funeral activities can be very helpful, right? But if your child is very young, if you think your child will get overwhelmed by being part, I mean, it all depends on your child's age, temperament, so many things, right? If they want to be involved, involve them. If you think it's going to overwhelm them, if they're too young, then there are other alternatives. Like, you can get your child to plant a tree. You can get them to make a scrapbook. You can share stories. You can release balloons. These are activities, all of which provide closure to a child.
Right.
Discussing afterlife, whether you're religious, whether you're not religious, the idea of an afterlife, the concept that a person continues to live on in your heart and mind is very reassuring to a grieving child. As I said, you can build a scrapbook with your child. You can plant something that represents the person you've lost.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Closure is extremely important. And of course, I mean, I can't emphasize this enough. Encourage your child to express what they are feeling, what they are thinking. Right? Talk about your own feelings. A lot of parents are like, oh, but I should hide my sadness from my child. No, you should not hide your sadness from your child. You should, I mean, obviously, unless you're very overwhelmingly, completely out of control, that's understandable. But, to your child, you should talk about your own feelings. You should express your own feelings. It helps kids be aware that, this is a natural process of life. Death is the most natural thing in the world.
Absolutely.
And it helps them be okay with their own feelings.
Yeah.
And you can say things like, but Shwiri, I know you're feeling very sad. Both of us loved Nani so much and she loved us as well.
Yeah.
And to reassure your child that, grieving is normal. With very young kids, you can do things like reading books about death, and there's some beautiful titles.
Yeah.
So if your child is able to express their, is big enough to able to express their emotions through words, please let them. If not, there are alternative activities like drawing, painting, building a scrapbook, or whatever. But the idea is, let your child express their feelings. Don't be afraid of bringing it up. Don't think that you'll stir something in them that will leave them traumatized. Nothing like that.
Yeah.
The more your child gets comfortable with talking about their feelings, the better it is for them.
Yeah, absolutely. On the topic of activities that you brought up, so there is also this, I think, a misconception that children seem to cope with grief more easily if they have lots of activities, if they're overscheduled. I know it is true for some adults, because sometimes adults tend to get immersed in work, to just distract themselves from overwhelming feelings, whatever it may be. It might be a setback or a death or whatever. But I don't know if it is the same for children. And some parents do seem to think so, and provide their children with a lot of overscheduling and activities. What do you think, Meghna?
It's very interesting that you sort of said that that's okay for adults, but actually it's not, Shobha. It's not okay for adults. Distraction is only always a short-term strategy. Whether it's about death, whether it's about anything that upsets us. Distraction is always a short-term strategy. It's never a long-term strategy, even for adults. For both
Right.
kids and adults, unless they sit in with their grief and face those very, very painful feelings, they're not going to be able to heal and move on. So overscheduling an adult is not a good idea. Immersing yourself in work is not a good idea. Overscheduling a child with activities to help them cope with their grief, never a good idea as well.
So thank you, Meghna, for that lovely explanation. Guys, as you know, we provide a mnemonic for every episode. And going with that, I know this is kind of a very serious and a very emotional topic, but this is something that you can use, in your hardest of times, when you're grieving the most. This could be something that will help you go through the steps very easily. So I would like to provide like a very short thing to remember. It is actually CARE, and it details out the steps that Meghna had just explained to us. That is C for closure. When Meghna explained the funeral procedures and all that, it is actually for closure, and it is very good for children to be a part of it. Offering age appropriate information without being vague or anything. Age appropriate information can never harm a child. It is very important that they know all the information. So CA, and then keeping it very real without using euphemisms, without being vague, being as real as possible. So that is R for you. And then allowing for expression, that is E. So it makes for care, which is a very appropriate term for the kind of phase that grieving, or the process that grieving is. So it is, I think this is the most appropriate thing. So thank you very much. And yeah.
And
Right.
crying is very therapeutic. I don't know why we have this societal thing is big boys don't cry. Are don't cry. What do you mean? Yeah, let them cry, let them express. It's good for you. It releases all those toxins from your body. Crying is therapeutic. Please cry.
Absolutely.
If that's what helps you.
Absolutely. So we would like to reiterate that you cannot and should not protect your kids from the pain of loss, but you can definitely help them build a lot of healthy coping skills. And we would also like to tell you that this podcast episode was focused on handling the grief, subsequent to the death of a grandmother or a grandparent or whoever. But we will have a subsequent episode that will talk about handling the death of a parent and how a child can be helped through the process.
So that's our episode for today. Thank you for listening to Big Talk About Tiny Humans, our podcast for parents and educators.
Hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to share it with your friends and family.
Listen and subscribe to Big Talk About Tiny Humans on the IVM Podcasts app, website, and all major audio platforms. We are available everywhere.
You can follow us on social media and online. Meghna is at The Therapist Mommy on Instagram and YouTube. And you can check out her website, raisingfamilyacademy.com, for a transformative course on raising a child with emotional intelligence.
And Devishobha is at KidsKintha on Twitter and Instagram. And check out kidskintha.com for in-depth articles and events on parenting and child development.
While you're at it, do also check out other great shows from the IVM Podcasts network at shows.ivmpodcasts.com. And IVM is on social media at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
We'll catch you again on our next episode.
Working Monday to Friday glued to your chair making you feel dull? Worry not. Get your 5-minute weekly dose of travel around the world with postcards from nowhere. Join me every Thursday as I explore the strange, obscure, and fascinating parts of the world and bring out facets of travel you may not have thought of before. You can find us on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Namaste, this is Cyrus Brocha. I am part of the government cancel culture program to remove rubbish off all the different streams available. So what we have is all the collected rubbish we put together on our show. It's called Cyrus Says. It's on IVM Podcast. You have to watch it and listen to it. It's on our app. It's on our website. It's on the YouTube channel. It's on Facebook. There are many different ways. Don't bother me and ask me how. You have to find out. We talk to different personalities. Many of them are known. Some are just people we meet downstairs and invite them up for chai. But the point is, it's fun and it's very therapeutic. So please join in and listen to Cyrus Says.